Teresa, thank you so much for joining me on this next edition of the Health Innovators video series. I'm Paul from Healthware. So really interested to hear more about what you're doing with NQ Medical. I know a bit of background on the company from some earlier discussions, but really excited for you to come and tell your story here. Before we get on to NQ Medical, I'd love to hear a bit more about your background and kind of where you started maybe before the company. So take us back a bit to begin with.
Of course. Okay, thank you, Paul. So my name is Teresa Arroyo. I'm a PhD in electronics, and my background is in telecommunication engineering. That is kind of like a mix between computer science, electronics, and signal processes analysis. But most of my research has been focused on the application of machine learning to develop healthcare solutions. In the past, I was always kind of like having a hard time to decide between pure biology science and technical science. So it's true that at least in Spain, the concept or the career of bioengineering didn't exist when I started in college. So yeah. I saw that this degree, this program at UPM had a possibility to just go through like a major on bio application of this technology. And that's the way I went through. So since the very beginning, my main interests have been in the application on how we use technology in life science. And I did, as I mentioned, research on different areas in the application of machine learning in healthcare, including speech analysis for detection of sleep apnea, Alzheimer's, some work on computer vision for reconstruction of a surgical laparoscopic view. And I came across NeuroQWERTY, that is the precursor of NQ, while I was finishing my master's thesis in Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. NeuroQWERTY was part of the Envision consortium that was a kind of like a collaboration between the regional government in Madrid and MIT, with a very clear focus on identifying unmet needs and finding ways to use technology to address those needs, and also in a way that they could, prior to entering any type of technical work, validate that the need exists, that technology can help, and that is commercially viable. So that was how NeuroQWERTY was born. Dr. Giancarlo and Dr. Sanchez Ferro were the leaders of this technology at MIT, and I was lucky to come across the project because I got invited to RLE, Research Laboratory of Electronics at MIT for a quick stay, because I had done similar stuff to what they were doing at NeuroQWERTY. And I mean, to me, that was like a yes, because, you know, for an engineer at MIT, yep. It's like, you cannot say no. And although I love Spain, it was going to be just for 2 months. And that sounded like a great opportunity. But those 2 months ended up becoming my PhD thesis, and many more years. I ended up living in Boston for over 5 years. And well, essentially what I love about NeuroQWERTY was its simplicity and how much sense it made. We essentially look at the way people interact with their personal devices to decode the information about their psychomotor health. And this applies to neurodegenerative diseases. And also, you know, I will say any user, because we all need to better monitor our brain health. Yeah. And this is something that we are doing. Well, we started validating at NeuroQWERTY, and we continue pursuing at NQ.
Yeah, and I think as we dive into a bit more detail about how this works, the name NeuroQWERTY will become a bit more obvious as to why it started with that. But it's amazing, isn't it, how we see these different fields coming together of, you know, biology and technology and engineering. Everything is sort of converging at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I think that the opportunities in collaboration. What I think about this type of consortium that envision that make you know, these programs really work, is that they are very aware of the need of putting together people with very different backgrounds and different skills to really develop, in this case, technologies that work and that matter. Because I think in the past, particularly engineers tend to think that we can solve problems that may not even exist, but we think, look, I've developed this like super cool technology, and you go to the clinic, you show it to the doctor, and they say like, oh yes, this is really cool, but I'm never going to use this. So I think, like having the right people, in this case it was Martha Gray in the lab at IMS that led this Envision consortium. Having people that see these things like really clear and put together the right people is crucial.
Yeah. So to that point then, because you're right, there's lots of amazing academic ideas that to some degree never get anywhere. So how did this academic idea, very smart idea, transition into NQ Medical and this, viable company? What were the origins there?
Yeah, so I think it was in September 2016 when I first met Mark Pascarella, that is one of NQ co-founders. And at the moment, Mark was focused on his company Founders Wanted, that essentially look into IP that was kind of like getting like all dusty in the labs that institutions like MIT, Harvard, or any other academic institution, and trying to identify those technologies or those ideas that were really like good and commercially viable. And the moment we met, I was focusing on finishing up my PhD. Luca Giancarlo was about to get on a professorship at UT Health. Alvaro, that was the clinical lead, had moved back to Madrid. So the team was kind of like, falling apart. And Mark met with us and with Dr. Martha Gray, and he said like, look, this is a really cool idea to be wasted and end up just being like a couple journal papers. So he licensed the technology through TLO at MIT. He phoned Rich, our CEO and co-founder of NQ Medical, and he kind of like make this work by putting together the science and the entrepreneur expertise, so that we were able to really pursue the commercial validation of NQ. And this was 2016. I joined as the first full-time employee in like early 2017, and since then I've been part of the NQ team.
Amazing. Yeah, and I mentioned before we sort of started this discussion, I've known Rich for quite a few years, and serial entrepreneur, just has new ideas every day. So, great guy to work with. So tell us about the actual technology. Tell me how it works and what it does and how it's being applied.
Yeah, of course. So, well, the process is as simple as looking at how fingers move on top of a mechanical keyboard or a touching device to decode signals or insights about the status of our brain health. So although it sounds very simple, typing is a very complex process that involves not only cognitive control, but also fine motor control. Even our mental status affects the way our fingers move. And the whole idea behind NQ is, okay, why don't we capture these signals, the signals that our fingers generate when typing on a keyboard or on a touchscreen device, and we try to connect them to the status of our brain health. This was particularly important in the context of neurodegenerative diseases, because right now there is no way to objectively measure how a patient is doing in not only Parkinson's, but mainly, I would say like all diseases that affect our brain are really hard to detect, quantify, and monitor. And we thought, okay, why don't we look at something that we do on a daily basis that will give us an amount of information that we've never had in this context, because we are used to see our doctor maybe once or twice a year, but we spend about 10 hours a day on either our laptop or touchscreen device. So we saw a very clear opportunity for us to develop a digital set of biomarkers that allow us to more objectively, more quantitatively, and more continuously track the status of our brain health. And more in particular, we focus on psychomotor impairment. Psychomotor defines essentially the processes that control our reaction and kinematics when interacting with different stimulus in the environment. And that's essentially what controls our fingers moving when using our phone or our computer.
Yeah. So this is purely a software intervention, if you like. There's no hardware needed. It taps into your computer, your phone, and by tracking how you're typing and changes in that, it's picking up signs of potential diseases there, I guess.
Yeah, it's completely invisible, and for us this was one of the key aspects that we wanted to define NQ, because living with a disease like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's is already very difficult. So we don't want to add more load to what it means living with a disease like this, and we want it to be completely unobtrusive and passive. So to the user is invisible. It's a software running in the background that gathers the timing information on when you press and release a key. And this information is sent to our servers, where we apply our algorithms to decode the relevant information about the status of the patient.
Amazing. And I guess, there's obvious application there for kind of early detection and diagnosis, but I guess it could also be used to maybe monitor disease progression. Are you looking at both of those scenarios?
Yeah, so we think that the application is mainly in 3 areas when looking on different clinical use cases in a disease, not only early detection and aid to diagnosis, but as you mentioned, continuous disease monitoring and assessing response to medication. Sometimes it's really hard to objectively identify if a drug or a specific drug regimen is working or not. And sometimes even compliance is the main limitation to providing patients with their best possible state. So having the ability to really assess what is going on in real time and in a completely, as I mentioned, passive way is critical for us to really optimize patients' state.
Yeah. But I guess it can be challenging to change the way that diagnosis is done and the way patients are normally dealt with. So how are you tackling that? Are you working with physicians, with pharma companies? Are you looking at both sides? Well, what's your kind of route there?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and I think particularly healthcare is the most challenging industry to introduce technology, and essentially because what is on stake is people's lives. So we are working closely with physicians. All of our studies involve our clinical collaborators in a way that really helps us understand from the technical team what is it that we need to find, what will be something that will be useful not only to the physician but also to the patient. Our clinical team at NQ, led by Dr. Mondesire, is really focused on that interaction with physicians, neurologists, patients to really assess how this will be useful. Because as I mentioned, we don't want to make the mistake of coming up with a cool app that we think people will use, but then doesn't really address the need. So we do feel in some cases some resistance, but I think this is something that is common across digital devices that are offering solutions that have never been used, and I think this needs to go through the usual product cycle with start working with early adopters, and then people will follow. So making sure that we address those needs so that we really get those early adopters use the technology and see the benefits of NQ is critical for us.
Yeah. And I guess one of the challenges that I see in a number of tech companies is you've got something here that could be applied in so many different areas. It's kind of working out where do you focus and where is the most need first of all, isn't it?
Yeah. So defining the need is really the most, not just defining the need, but shaping the product so that even though the core is still applicable to many use cases in the clinical context, shaping it in a way that the use is clear and that it doesn't add more complexity to the already complex task of a physician managing a disease as difficult as Parkinson's.
Yeah, yeah. And is this mainly in the US you're looking, or is this on a global basis?
So we are working in mainly in the US, but right now we're starting to move into Europe. I'm indeed right now working from Spain, when I'm originally from, and we are building a team of data scientists here. And we have some collaboration with Japanese companies that so I would say we are not limited to the US. It's true that most of our active studies are in the US, but particularly, for example, NeuroQWERTY was partially US, partially Spain. So I think this is going to be a global solution.
Yeah. And it seems to me you're almost approaching this almost like a drug company. You seem to be investing quite heavily in clinical studies and building that evidence base behind what you're doing.
Yeah, for us that's one of the things that we want to people to connect to NQ, like having that scientific validation and giving it that strong weight to our validation process, I think is critical. We see a lot of tools, a lot of new apps that are in the wellness, clinical, or health categories, and a lot of the times what we see is that when you go to the physician with a tool like that, or the output of a tool like that, if they don't see the validation, if they are not able to trust those outputs, they are never going to use it. So we want physicians to trust our technology, and for that we need to first fully trust our technology, and that only is going to be feasible through validation. And so we take that very seriously.
Yeah, because there's a lot of companies I see that have very cool technology, but they're not building that evidence base. And as you say, that then causes problems downstream. The other key challenge, of course, is market access, reimbursement. So who will pay for these things? So what are your thoughts on that? Where do you see that going with your technology?
Yeah, so I think, well, I'm not an expert in this area. There are other members of the team that control this better, but insurance companies are starting to cover some of these digital solutions, and it's possible to get one of those codes that allows physicians to get reimbursed just from interpreting some of these digital technologies outputs. So I think in the direct clinical use or in clinical practice, it will be insurance companies. I don't see patients or physicians paying for this directly. In the context of clinical research, it would be pharma companies looking for a secondary endpoint, or even once we are FDA cleared, a primary endpoint to really assess if their drugs are working. Like one of the main limitations right now to develop or to go through the drug validation phase in neuro is that there are no reliable endpoints to measure the impact of the drug or the new compound. And also because we are testing the drugs in patients that are very advanced in the progression of the disease, it takes a lot of time to really state a final diagnosis. People that end up develop Parkinson's maybe initially diagnosed as essential tremor, even Alzheimer's is very often overlapping with Parkinson's disease. So we need tools to better measure the impact, but also tools to detect the disease earlier, so that we can really attempt to try neuroprotective and neuromodifying drugs that could stop or change the course of the disease. So I think that those are maybe the two pieces, the one in clinical practice and the one in clinical research or drug development. And so there's, as you mentioned before, there are many areas where this could be applied.
And on the clinical research side, where are the regulatory authorities on that? If you look at the FDA or the EMA, because it's quite a big shift for them to recognize these new digital biomarkers, isn't it?
Yeah, so well, it's still unclear, particularly for tools that include a machine learning component as ours. So FDA is working really hard on defining the protocols and the guidance documents for machine learning powered companies and technologies to go through the clearance process. But well, I have to say that knowing that the work that they need to do, I see this as a really big challenge, and I understand why they are taking their time to really define this well. What I know is that right now, even prior to clearance, it's possible to use digital technologies as secondary rescue endpoints without the need to have having gone through the full clearance process.
Right.
So this could be used in studies, and then if a pharma company wants to use NQ and to guide not only their experiments and their validation process, but even to get clearance, they could do it in the context of clinical research.
Yeah. And what about the impact of COVID? Because as we record this, we're at the end of April. COVID is still very much a factor in many countries, but it seems like it's almost accelerated use of broadly digital in healthcare, but particularly these kinds of artificial intelligence approaches. Do you agree with that? Have you seen that accelerated?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen it in many other areas, like, the working remotely is now a real thing. And I think a similar phenomenon has appeared in the healthcare industry with digital technologies, remote-based evidence, etc. The problem with COVID and the fact that most clinical trials require patients to go to the clinic to be assessed is that it has stopped millions of clinical trials, and with the consequent loss of money that I don't think I can put numbers to that. So pharma companies and researchers have started taking more serious digital technologies and remote-based evidence. Indeed, one of our studies that was stopped for a little while was transforming into a fully remote or fully virtual study, and we are seeing that the results have nothing to envy to other studies that were require the presence of the patient in the clinic, and people are even more willing to participate in studies if it doesn't require for them to go to the clinic. So I do see this accelerating adoption not only in the clinical research, also in regular clinical practice, because it's the future, and we do see the advantage of this. In the US, or I can speak for Spain too. Even prior COVID, we were the wait times were really long to see a neurologist, and we've seen that there are all these tools that could make that smooth down and reduce significantly those waiting times. So I think, as terrible as these times are, I think it has also brought up some opportunity for in particular digital technologies.
Yeah, and as you say, very often there are no sort of rational reasons not for digitizing. It's just behavior change and the way we've always done things. And COVID, I think, has kind of forced some of that change, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So looking at it from the patient perspective and thinking about behavior change, it feels like there's been a journey, maybe over the last 10 years or so, where people are starting to track their own health a little bit better. We've got wearables, you monitor your heart rate, your sleep, etc. But maybe brain health is a little bit behind the curve there. So do you agree with that? And how do you see that developing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And maybe I'm a little biased here because I'm a real geek in that sense, and I love looking at my own data. But I do observe this in the patients we work with. And I was first surprised when we first met with a patient group, and this was during the NeuroQWERTY times. I was completely sure that no patient would want to know how they were doing, because as we mentioned, we were focused very much on this being passive and completely invisible to the patient, and we thought that it would be bad for their emotional state to know if they were getting worse or even better, just to have them too obsessed with their status. And what I learned from meeting with patients is that is in many cases, and in the majority of the cases, is the opposite. They want to know how they are doing. They want to know if any of their like daily habits like help them feel better, and they want to do that in an objective way. So you know, if people are recommending them like, you know, improving their diet or sleeping more or exercising more, they want to see a metric that shows that that is really helping their psychomotor state in this case, or their brain health, if we speak in a broader terms. So I do see that people are interested in their, you know, not only tracking things that we can already track with you know, wearables and you know, commodity tools, but I do envision this being used, or NQ like technology being used by the general user. Because we really trust this type of data. Who could imagine that people will care at all about the number of steps they made on a daily basis, and you see people like really standing more and moving more because they haven't reached the 10,000 like step threshold. So I think it's happening, and I think it's important because it allows us to have healthier lives and to
I think particularly during lockdown, where if you don't make an effort to stand up and move around, you look at your step count and it's horrifically low sometimes. But you're right, it's becoming more integrated. So I mean, you look at something like the Apple Watch that now has the ECG device integrated into it. Do you see that sort of vision for NQ Medical? Do you imagine a point where every iPhone maybe has NQ Medical on there and it's monitoring how you're typing?
Yeah, and I will say that that's our goal, and you know, being part of every user like daily life, and you know, as I mentioned, we operate in the background, and I think we can be really helpful to not only measure like things that we should all care, like fatigue, for example, or sleep deprivation, but imagine you're entering an age where it is possible or likely for some people to develop a neurodegenerative disease. Like it's important to know as soon as possible, not only for treating it early, but also to adapt your life and to prepare for the potential life changes that you need to address in order to, you know, with all those circumstances, adapting and optimizing the rest of your life.
No, I think you're right. That early identification is important, but it's then what do you do with that? Now, it feels like there's more data emerging about brain health, about what's potentially causing what you can do. I caught something just the other day. There's a bit of research around sleep in middle age and how that potentially links to onset of Alzheimer's. So we've clearly still got a long way to go, but it feels like we're making a lot of progress there.
Sleep, stress. We all know about like diet and exercising and how important it is. So yes, I think you know, if we have something to objectively measure it, people will really take it serious.
So what are your kind of hopes for the next few years with NQ Medical? Where would you like to see that journey going?
So we have a lot of things in the wish list, but I think probably the most immediate one is to get this FDA clearance for our Parkinson's algorithm, the Parkinson's product, because I think that that's going to kind of set the steps for any new disease or any new condition that we further validate. So that's going to be really, really important for us. And now we are putting a lot of effort in cognition. So we started with evaluating fine motor control, but we know and we've shown in our early data that we can assess cognitive impairment through the analysis of typing, and you know, the number of patients that could benefit from something like this is way larger than Parkinson's. People affected by mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, you know, the numbers are growing, and we need the tools to assess that. So I think continuing the validation of the algorithms for cognition and showing that this works as well as our Parkinson's tool is the second main piece in the wish list. And I guess more from a personal perspective, if I can spend the next few years like focusing on doing like cool research as I've been doing in NQ with for the past like 4 or 5 years, I will be really, really happy.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And I guess, and finally, and we touched on this before around who you're working with, but are there particular types of partnerships you're seeking at the moment?
Yes, so what I think what we need is to find people that really believe in the technology and that want to be part of this development and validation process. We started with a very clear focus on Parkinson's disease, and we kind of like developed the Parkinson's product, just thinking about like Parkinson's and Parkinson's use cases. But as we started expanding to other diseases, we see a lot of overlap between different neurodegenerative conditions, and it doesn't make sense to kind of like start the process from scratch for any new disease that comes to our pipeline. So we are working on developing this biomarker discovery platform that essentially automatizes and makes more efficient the incorporation of new diseases and new clinical use cases. So this is allowing us not only to better understand our biomarkers and connecting them to specific aspects of psychomotor impairment. In the past, we will develop an algorithm to assess Parkinson's severity. Now, with this approach, we are able to tell you if what has gone down is our interdigit coordination or our attention capacity, or if it's verbal memory or non-verbal memory, what is more affected. So we are approaching this biomarker building as a platform, and we see this as something that is useful not for a specific drug in a specific study for a specific condition, but for the whole pipeline of any pharmaceutical company. So the type of partnership that we are looking for is the one that values that concept. The joint development of something that is not restricted to a very specific clinical use case, but that has the potential to be applicable in many other areas.
Yeah. Well, I certainly wish you continued success with that. For me, this is such an interesting technology because from the patient perspective, it's so simple. It's like you just type and it monitors how you're typing and that's it. But as you've touched on today, there's a lot of very sophisticated technology and information behind there. So I know it's not easy to develop these things at all. But look, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing a bit more background. And I wish you all the best in the future. Good luck with it.
Thank you, Paul. It was a pleasure, and anytime happy to connect and tell a little bit more about how NQ is making progress.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.